Today at 6, more political chaos as the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, leaves the government unexpectedly. It means she's the shortest-serving Home Secretary since 1945. We'll be having the latest on the reasons for her departure. She admits making a mistake with official communications, but she also attacks the direction of the government.
Yet more chaos, another resignation, and a zinger of a resignation letter as more people here ask, how long can this go on?
Is this your last Prime Minister's questions? Is it time to resign?
Earlier, the Prime Minister had been fighting off renewed demands for her to step down after the collapse of the mini-budget.
Economic credibility gone. And her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
Well, we'll have the latest on the cost of living crisis, and we'll have more on that sudden departure of the Home Secretary. Also on the programme, food prices increasing to a 40-year high. That's a major reason why inflation has risen to over 10%. The failings of maternity services in East Kent, an independent report says dozens of babies might have survived with better care. And we report on the many new businesses trying to survive in the city of Sunderland.
On BBC London, as rents rise in the capital, we meet one tenant on the hunt for a home and the plumber who's left customers thousands of pounds out of pocket.
Welcome to BBC News at 6. We've come to the city of Sunderland. We're going to be talking about another sharp rise in the cost of living, and all of that happening on a day of continued chaos for Liz Truss and her government. Within the past couple of hours, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has left her job unexpectedly, and in her resignation letter, she says that she made a mistake by sending an official document from her personal email. She told the Prime Minister that she accepted responsibility for that. But her letter also criticises the government, saying that Liz Truss and others have broken key pledges made to voters. Grant Shapps will return to government as the new Home Secretary, and he is the fourth in the space of 4 years, underlining the current sense of political instability. Well, lots for us to talk about, not least on the economy and the chaos within government. Let's join our political editor, Chris Mason, at Westminster.
Hugh, as extraordinary as this might sound, the Prime Minister was beginning in the last few days to make an argument that said that she represented stability. Yes, extraordinary, but here was the case that they were beginning to make, that she would be stable versus the alternative. The alternative being another Prime Minister magicked up by the Parliamentary Conservative Party or a general election. It was always going to be a difficult argument, and it became more and more difficult as today progressed. Not only has this new embattled Prime Minister lost a Chancellor, she's now lost a Home Secretary as well.
How long can the Prime Minister last?
Never mind the Prime Minister, it's the Home Secretary who's gone. This was her yesterday. Today, she's out. Out because this morning she sent an official document from her personal email account, a breach of the rules. In a zinger of a resignation letter to the Prime Minister, Suella Braverman wrote, "Pretending we haven't made mistakes, carrying on as if everyone can't see that we have made them, and hoping that things will magically come right is not serious politics. I have made a mistake. I accept responsibility. I resign." She continues, I have concerns about the direction of this government. Not only have we broken key pledges that were promised to our voters, but I have had serious concerns about this government's commitment to honouring manifesto commitments. Last month, Suella Braverman was promoted to one of the great offices of state. She cheered on a Prime Minister in trouble at the party conference. Today, she becomes the shortest-serving Home Secretary since the Second World War. All that after a summer in which she pitched to be Prime Minister herself.
Don't vote for me because I'm a woman. Don't vote for me because I'm brown. Vote for me because I love this country and because I would do anything for it.
Mrs Braverman is on the right of the party. Just last night she was taunting Labour and others in the Commons over her plans to crack down on disruptive protests.
It's the Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokarati, dare I say, the anti-growth coalition that we have to thank for the disruption that we are seeing on our roads today.
Should the Prime Minister take responsibility for her mistakes, sir?
The man replacing Suella Braverman is Grant Shapps. He didn't back Liz Truss for Prime Minister. Only weeks ago he was organising a rebellion against her. Now he's her Home Secretary. A hellish week for Liz Truss has got worse. Earlier she had to endure a Prime Minister's question time loaded with humiliation.
A book is being written about the Prime Minister's time in office. Apparently it's going to be out by Christmas. Is that the release date or the title?
I have been in office for just under 2 months, and I have delivered the energy price guarantee. I've reversed the national insurance increase. Mr. Speaker, that is more of a record of action than the honourable gentleman in his 2.5 years in the job.
The Prime Minister defiant, the Labour leader said she'd crashed the economy, put people's bills up and was now cutting spending. And he said she'd ditched everything she'd stood for.
45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Economic credibility, gone. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
The Prime Minister stands up, the folder is slammed down, and Liz Truss insisted,
I am a fighter and not a quitter.
But what policies would survive a promise by the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to look again at so many government spending commitments?
Can the Prime Minister perhaps turn to her Chancellor right now, get permission to make another U-turn and commit to raising the state pension at the rate of inflation?
Prime Minister.
We will maintain the triple lock, and I am completely committed to it. So is the Chancellor.
A promise originally made, then put under review, made again. The first of countless examples of policy ideas that are another battle for the Prime Minister battling to cling on herself.
Well, let's join Chris live again at Westminster. And I'm tempted to say, Chris, it's difficult to know where to start. So let's start with the resignation of the Home Secretary and the reasons behind it and what you read into it in terms of the, let's say, lack of stability that seems to be the norm.
The simple truth tonight, Hugh, is we are in rolling chaos in government. Most of the time, that would be an exaggeration from someone like me standing in a spot like this. It is a simple expression of the facts. Just before Prime Minister's questions at lunchtime today, there was a suspension of one of her senior communications advisors over briefing to the newspapers involving Conservative backbenchers at the weekend. A matter of hours later, the Prime Minister was due to be on a trip outside London to a factory that had been briefed by her advisors. Suddenly, it was dropped. She was back into the House of Commons for a face-to-face meeting with the now former Home Secretary and another huge hole in her government. Stability. What stability? There isn't any. It's a government living and trying to survive hour by hour.
And on top of all of that, Chris, if you look at the business going on in the House of Commons behind you this evening, another test of leadership.
There is. Every moment is a test for this government right now, so there's another one coming this evening. Because of Liz Truss's policy platform proving to be so controversial and then huge elements of it being junked, lots of it is being contested by her own side. And one of those policies is fracking, this idea of drilling out gas from underneath our feet. Hugely controversial. There was due to be a vote, there is a vote coming up on it this evening. The government decided to turn it into a confidence vote, effectively saying whatever your view on fracking, Conservative MPs, you must back us because this is about support for the Prime Minister. Some Conservative MPs acknowledging they won't be able to do that. The consequence is likely to be that, to use the language, they will lose the whip, they will no longer be Conservative MPs. So every moment, every hour brings colossal challenges for this government, with more and more now asking the question, how long can this go on? For many, even those very supportive originally of Liz Truss, they fear this is just simply not sustainable.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason, our political editor, with his analysis this evening. And all of this happening on a day of worrying economic news. Let me explain where we are in Sunderland, because we're reporting on the impact of this economic news. We're at the National Glass Centre. It's magnificent. If you haven't been, it's well worth a visit. It's part of the rich industrial heritage of this region, and that's the backdrop for the news on the economy and the local economy today. And the news that we're reporting, of course, is that inflation, the rate of inflation, is back in double figures. That's the highest level in 40 years. The rate, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, rose to 10.1% last month. The main cause is the sharp rise in the cost of food and drink, now running at an annual 14.5%, and that's a rate not seen since 1980. Bread and cereals, meat, milk, cheese and eggs, all more expensive, though petrol prices have fallen. Now, the Bank of England has warned that overall inflation could reach 13% by the end of the year. And it's expected, therefore, that interest rates will rise again to try to control that. There is a reason why September's inflation figure is especially important, and that's because it is the figure that's used to calculate the rise in the state pension and in welfare benefits come next April. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, our economics editor, Faisal Islam, has been speaking to households and businesses here in Sunderland about the cost of living crisis.
It is the 14th month of relentlessly rising food prices, and it's no surprise here at Mickey's Place, a food bank and warm space in a church in Usworth on the edge of Sunderland. A long march up of inflation, a hit to the cost of living, a rise in food prices not seen for 42 years.
We are trying to provide as much help and support to this community as possible, but the cost of living is just really to a situation where people just cannot cope. So yes, we laugh with them and we cry with them.
And the government says it's trying to help with energy bills, and
we don't see it down here.
This is one area where the official figures lag behind everyday experiences at grocery tills and the increasing number of households, some working, who now need help with the most basic of necessities, food and warmth.
Everything's going up.
Can you even imagine some of the prices you're facing in the grocers right now?
Oh, butter is a luxury now for most people, I would think.
Yeah.
It really is.
We come to somewhere like this, which is a godsend, where we can have a hot meal, we can sit beside a nice warm radiator.
And literally by the radiator?
That's right, yes, it's a nice warm radiator.
Yeah. What is it, so you're here because it'll save you having to...
That's right, it saves a lot from home. It saves a lot of cooking at home, which costs more money. The food bill alone, it come down because we come here.
Food prices are now up 14.5% in a year. That's the highest annual rate since 1980, the second highest since 1977. Some milk prices are up 42% over a year, eggs up 22%, and jam is up 28%. Charlie has just taken over something of a Sunderland institution, the Muller Bakery in Hendon. A time of record rises in energy prices, imported food ingredient prices, and high business rates too are a recipe to make him consider closing one of their 3 outlets.
Literally every ingredient that we use has went up like drastically. Some days, like or weeks, we get reports of how much things are going up, and we'll get in, say for instance, like we buy a box of fondant icing and it's going up like 60% from one week to the next, and that's like, that we can't just put our prices up 60% because people just won't pay it, so it hits us really hard.
As everyone awaits the Halloween budget from Jeremy Hunt, it is the broad-based nature of price rises, food, energy and services, that's a little scary. Inflation at this time matters as it normally forms the basis for minimum rises in state pensions and benefits. But this morning that had been in doubt as the Chancellor looks to save money. Back at the food charity, some relief and bewilderment for Betty.
It fills you with dread. Yeah. Because are we going to have to start and live on what little bit we've got saved, and what happens when that's gone? Yeah. Where do we go from there?
Well, I think we've just heard the Prime Minister the government having said that it might not do that, have now decided that, well, they will put it up with the rate of inflation. What do you make of that?
That's today. What happens tomorrow? They could change their minds by tomorrow, because every day they change their mind.
So pensioners are spared eventually, but others could face the price squeeze from a government trying to find savings.
And Faisal joins me now. You spoke to lots of people during the course of that report. We have political instability, which we've heard about. We have economic instability. Where is this heading?
I think the big picture is this. On Monday, at that reverse budget, the new Chancellor reassured the markets, and that's proving a successful exercise. But the flip side was less reassurance for those people who rely on government spending, and the consequences of that are hugely some political instability, I think. I mean, just going on that trip around this city was really quite interesting. We spoke to the vicar that ran that scheme, and I put to her the government had spent tens of billions of pounds preventing people from having typical energy bills of £4,000, £5,000, £6,000. Doesn't that count for something? For her, she hadn't even noticed it, because for many people, £2,500 typical bills are unbelievable enough. So there's a political issue there for the government. You just heard there from Betty, who I said, broke the news to her, that her pension uprating was safe. And she said, well, are they going to do another U-turn? That's Betty. Imagine big businesses. This is a famous area, the one area in England where they have an export surplus with Europe because of the famous car factory. What are businesses like that thinking about political stability? The Bank of England today saying that they weren't briefed on the mini-budget, and if they had been briefed, they might have been able to tell the Treasury about some of the economic instability. So I think almost the economic stability in the markets has been transferred into political stability, and the risk is the markets might start noticing that too.
Okay, Faisal, many thanks for that. Faisal Aslam, our economics editor. And by the way, you can find plenty of tips and more explaining pieces, analysis from Faisal and other of our expert colleagues, as well as our £1 family recipe plan, which has proved very popular. It's all on the BBC News website, bbc.co.uk/news, or of course, you can turn to the BBC News app. Well now, let's turn to one of the day's other main stories, because it's estimated that at least 45 babies might have survived had they received better care at East Kent NHS Hospitals Trust. That's one of the findings of an independent review which looked at more than 200 cases at the Trust between 2009 and 2020. It said the hospitals often provided care that was suboptimal and led to significant harm. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan first reported on concerns over 2 years ago, and he's followed the story of many of the families.
We are living in the 5th largest economy in the world, and women and children are dying here as if we lived in a remote village.
Helen Gittis and Kelly Rudolph were colleagues at Kent University before bereavement made them friends. In 2016, Kelly's daughter Celandine died aged 5 days. 2 years earlier, Helen's daughter Harriet was just 8 days old when she died. Today, the two mothers learned how bad the maternity care had been that they and many others received.
It felt like a vindication that all of the things that we thought were wrong were wrong, that our judgments about the failings that we had suffered were real failings?
It felt very truthful in
It
that
felt
way.
truthful, absolutely.
The blaming of mothers for what happened to their children, and that is something that comes out very strongly in the report as something that is not terribly special or unusual, but is so hard to deal with.
Today's report found that at a minimum 45 babies might have survived with basic levels of care. Another 52 incidents of brain injury and harm to mothers could have been avoided with better treatment. But despite this, the Trust was said to give the appearance of covering up the scale of the problems.
There was a cover-up. What I don't think was that it was a planned cover-up. I think it was just the way that everybody found themselves behaving. They reinforced each other in that behaviour, sure, but I don't believe that it was a conscious plot. A cover-up, very definitely, and people were denied truths that they deserved to great personal detriment.
While most births at the Trust are healthy, the inquiry found that cliques and egos among staff prevented good teamwork, that babies' deaths were dismissed as God's will. Over the 11 years they investigated, the teams said they could find no discernible improvements in care. Today the Trust apologised unreservedly for their failures.
These families came to us expecting that we would care for them safely, and we failed them. We must now learn from and act on this report.
The Trust have promised to make improvements, but today's report says a system for monitoring the maternity performance of all trusts nationwide needs adopting. For these two friends, however, the publication is a moment of both clarity and reflection.
They'd known for more than 6 years by the time our daughter was born that there were problems, and yet we suffered because they refused to learn.
I really want this to be a moment when I can actually begin to think about my daughter and to miss her.
The death of Harry Richford in 2017, aged just 7 days, contributed hugely to the inquiry being set up. In particular, his grandfather Derek uncovered serious failings, pressurising politicians to act.
Have you had time to reflect on how well you as a family have represented his voice over the past few years?
I would like to think that we as a family have done Harry proud.
Harry Richford only lived for a week, but if today's report leads to meaningful maternity improvements, countless families he'll never meet will have reason to thank him. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Kent.
President Putin has announced heightened security measures across Russia, also including martial law in the recent unlawfully annexed 4 areas of Ukraine. Now, the 4 regions affected are Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, as well as Crimea. And the move comes as Ukrainian forces have been closing in on the occupied city of Kherson, with Russian officials starting to move civilians from that city. The Iranian athlete Elnaz Rekabi, who competed in an international climbing competition without wearing a hijab, has received a jubilant welcome in Tehran. Her action was seen by many as a show of support for the ongoing protests against the mandatory wearing of headscarves for women across Iran. Now, despite the economic challenges of the past few decades here in the northeast of England, Sunderland has nonetheless become home to lots of new businesses, benefiting from investment in the city centre and the coastal redevelopment. Just over 1,500 new companies were set up here last year. Now, the BBC's Sunderland reporter Andy Watson has been to meet some of the city's entrepreneurs.
For many people, Sunderland is an attractive place to live, and importantly for the local economy, somewhere to start a business. The Stack at Seaburn opened in 2020. It's become a hub for local businesses along the coast despite difficult financial times.
All costs have gone up, so utilities, packaging, food, labour, so it is a concern. However, we're not seeing any drop off in sales.
I just came up with the idea of the self-service baths, walk-in service. You don't need an appointment, where owners can come off the beach and bath and dry the dog. It's really busy, 7 days a week. It's available throughout the year. Since we have seen a struggle, but we'll come through it.
Hey Laurie, all right. Just round the corner, a young entrepreneur has found her niche.
Having the client base that I have now, like watching it grow for the last year and a half, something I'm really proud of.
As someone who's been born and raised in Sunderland, I'd heard that Mackie's Corner was the posh end of the town, but in recent years it's been forgotten about and neglected, but now it's back.
An upmarket gentleman's outfit is opened just last year. The business is proud to be involved in the redevelopment of the city, something that's not gone unnoticed by customers.
I mean, I'm 62 and this is the highest level of investment I've seen probably since the late 1960s, and it's long overdue. So I think better times ahead.
The city is also focusing on investing in the growth of the tech sector. At Sunderland Software City, they've helped launch more than 100 new businesses since 2020.
I'm currently looking at a photo frame and butterflies are flying out of the frame.
Augmented and virtual reality tech has been adapted by startups here.
We actually have a lot of young people come through our immersive lab that we have, and part of this kit that you're wearing is used with young people to excite them, inspire them about careers and pathways into STEM.
So although experts predict an uncertain future, the view from the businesses we visited is that bright times are ahead. Andy Watson, BBC News, Sunderland.
Just a sense there from Andy of some of the entrepreneurial activity that's going on in this area, which of course has such a rich industrial tradition. Now we're talking this evening about some chaos, to put it mildly, at Westminster. We've been talking about economic instability, but the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has resigned this evening. Grant Shapps is the new Home Secretary. Let's go back to Chris Mason at Westminster. And a sense from you tonight, Chris, because you touched on it in your earlier contribution, people asking how much longer can this go on? What is your sense tonight?
People are asking that, Hugh, and you get a hint of it from the very person who was serving as Home Secretary until this afternoon in a politically devastating resignation letter which questions Liz Truss's judgment, her political actions and her policy platform. And this from someone in Suella Braverman, who is a flag bearer, a flag waver from the right of the party, someone who proudly joined Liz Truss's campaign once her own campaign, Suella Braverman's campaign, had run out of road in the summer. Meanwhile, we now have a new Home Secretary who's just been speaking in the last couple of minutes, Grant Shapps, outside his new office, who didn't back Liz Truss to be Prime Minister, and just a couple of weeks ago was leading a rebellion against her. And now he is her Home Secretary. We are deep into you couldn't make this up territory. Now, from the Prime Minister's perspective, it's actually quite useful to be able to bring someone like Grant Shapps in, because the accusation levelled against her has been one of assembling a team in her own image. She can now say it is a much broader tent. But the blunt truth tonight is that this is a government teetering again, trying to cling on.
Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason with the latest thoughts there at Westminster this evening. Let's have a look at the weather then, and we're joined by Ben this evening. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Hugh. Thank you. Good evening. It's been a pretty windy day out there and a wet day for some of us as well, not least in Northern Ireland, where you can see we had largely grey skies overhead. We've had heavy and persistent rain. You can see that here on our earlier radar image. But that is tied in with something much bigger, a huge area of low pressure, which you can see as we zoom out on the chart, this swirl of cloud, and that will be throwing further pulses of rain northwards over the next couple of days. So during tonight, we'll see a band of heavy rain. It's already approaching from the southwest corner. It will drive its way northwards and eastwards overnight. There'll be some heavy thundery bursts in that. Could be some fog patches developing across western parts by the end of the night, and it is, for most of us, going to be a mild night. Now, tomorrow, we're watching this big lump of rain, which will be moving northwards. There's some uncertainty about just how far west it will come. So if you're in the West Country, maybe the West Midlands, the Welsh borders, don't take this forecast too literally. It may be that the rain shifts a little further westwards. Certainly eastern England, very wet. Some rain also pushing northwards through Scotland. This lump of rain continues its journey north as we go through the day. But further west, we will see some sunshine It's not going to be as windy as it was today, and that will help it feel actually really quite warm where you get sunshine in the south. Highs of 19, maybe 20 degrees, and warmer than it was today in the north of Scotland. Now, the wind becomes more of a feature again on Friday. Very blustery around some of these western coasts particularly. We will see showers or longer spells of rain pushing northwards, some heavy, some thundery, some patchy rain still fringing into the northeast of Scotland. Temperatures across eastern England perhaps up to 20 or 21 degrees. For the weekend, well, there will be some dry spells at times, but further rain, and it will often be quite windy. Back to you, Hugh.
Ben, many thanks for the update there on the weather. That's it from BBC News at 6 from me and the team in Sunderland. We'll be back, of course, at 10. But now on BBC One, it's time to join our news teams in the nations and regions across the United Kingdom. So from Sunderland and from the National Glass Centre, thanks for watching and goodbye.